You should really talk to John. He's handled our money for years. That's the kind of thing you say about a financial advisor when you trust him completely. It's also, according to federal prosecutors, exactly how John Jay Kersey built a 20-year, $8.6 million fraud. One referral, one comfortable conversation at a time. To understand how it worked, we have to go back to, before any of it had a name, back to a financial advisor in Ohio and the friends and family who trusted him for 2 decades. This case, according to federal prosecutors, involved multiple victims across 2 decades. To tell it as one story, we're following a representative couple we'll call the Millers. They aren't specific people named in court records. They stand in for the friends and relatives described in the government's case. And what happened to them happened to real clients Kersey knew personally. The Millers had known Kersey socially for years before either of them became his client. That was, in a lot of ways, the appeal. He wasn't a name from an ad or a firm they'd found searching online. He showed up at the same gatherings they did. Other people in their circle already used him and seemed happy with the arrangement. When it came time to get serious about retirement, going with someone they already knew felt like the cautious choice, not the risky one. For years, their accounts moved the way accounts are supposed to move. Statements came in on schedule. The numbers looked reasonable. And whenever either of them had a passing doubt, the other one usually talked them out of it, not because they weren't paying attention, but because they had a second source of reassurance sitting right across the table. If something looked strange to Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller might mention that the Petersons had been with Kersey even longer and had never had a problem. If she had a question, he'd remind her that Kersey had managed his own parents' money for a decade. Between the two of them, there was always someone available to say it was fine. It wasn't that either of them was gullible on their own. It's that a couple checking in with each other tends to look, from the inside, exactly like due diligence, even when neither person is actually verifying anything outside the relationship itself. Then, at some point, Kersey suggested they move their existing investments into other funds. He had access to something he described as a better opportunity. This is not unusual advice from a financial advisor. People rebalance portfolios all the time. The Millers agreed, the same way dozens of his other clients agreed over the years. According to prosecutors, that's where the money stopped going, where they believed it was going. Instead, it went to Kersey. To keep the arrangement looking normal, he produced what looked like routine paperwork, fabricated financial summaries, fake account numbers, charts and graphs showing steady, believable growth. None of it looked wrong. It looked exactly like what a financial advisor's reporting is supposed to look like. Here's the part worth sitting with, because it's the reason this lasted 20 years instead of 2. Most fraud depends on convincing a stranger to trust you quickly. A cold call, an urgent email, a convincing story from someone you've never met. This scheme didn't need any of that. Kersey wasn't building trust from scratch. He already had it, accumulated over years of ordinary social contact, long before any money changed hands. And the Millers weren't just trusting Kersey individually. They were trusting each other's trust in him. That's the part that made this especially durable. When one person's doubt surfaces, a partner's confidence can smooth it right back over. Not out of carelessness, but because that's what couples do for each other. Add in a wider circle of friends who are seemingly having the same good experience, and the checking in that might normally happen with a new advisor just never had a reason to start. Nobody was evaluating a stranger's pitch on its own merits. Everyone was just confirming what the group already believed. Prosecutors say Kersey used the stolen money for ordinary things, paying down his own credit card balances, covering insurance premiums, and putting money toward a real estate purchase. When clients occasionally asked for a withdrawal or needed a payment to keep believing their investment was real, Kersey paid them using funds taken from other clients. As long as some people were getting paid on request, nobody had much reason to ask harder questions. Prosecutors also say Kersey specifically took advantage of clients during their most vulnerable moments. In one documented instance, after a client's spouse died, Kersey told her he'd personally take care of her finances, going forward a reassuring thing to hear in the middle of a loss like that. In reality, he had already stolen her money and was using it for himself. It's a detail that shows how far the exploitation went, beyond the Miller's story alone. This wasn't only affinity and referrals. For at least one client, it was grief, used deliberately as an opening. For 20 years, from 2003 through 2023, this continued. Federal prosecutors say Kersey took a total of $8.6 million from friends and relatives who trusted him with their futures. Eventually, the version of events Kersey had spent 2 decades maintaining stopped holding together. Exactly which thread came loose first isn't part of the public record. But by the time federal investigators were involved, the pattern was clear enough to build a case around. Real money going in, fabricated paperwork coming back, and a client list stretching across 20 years of people who considered Kersey a friend before they ever considered him an advisor. In June 2025, Kersey was federally charged by bill of information, meaning he'd already agreed to move toward a guilty plea rather than contest the case before a grand jury. That same month, he pleaded guilty to wire fraud. In April 2026, Kersey, then 65 years old and living in Maineville, Ohio, stood before senior U.S. District Judge Susan J. DeLotte to be sentenced. She gave him 60 months in federal prison, 5 years, for 2 decades of theft from people who never stopped believing he was on their side. There are a few things worth taking from this case, especially if you manage money as a couple or family. The first is that shared trust can be more dangerous than trust alone. When a whole social circle vouches for the same person, doubt has nowhere to land. Each individual's confidence reinforces everyone else's, and the group ends up more certain collectively than any one person would have been on their own. The second is that paperwork can be manufactured just as easily as trust. Fabricated statements, invented account numbers, charts showing steady growth. None of that requires your money to actually be working the way it's supposed to. It only requires someone willing to make the numbers up, and enough time passing without anyone checking the source behind them. The third is that the moments people most need to lean on someone else, a death, a health crisis, any stretch of distraction or grief, are exactly the moments a dishonest advisor can use. Not because anyone involved was careless, but because that's precisely when people hand off decisions they'd normally review more closely. If you manage money with a partner, or as a couple more broadly, a few concrete habits would have made a real difference here. Ask for account statements directly from the custodian, holding your money the actual bank or brokerage, rather than relying only on summaries your advisor prepares. If a statement lists an account number, call the institution and confirm the account actually exists and holds what it claims to. Be cautious about treating a friend's or relative's satisfaction with an advisor as its own form of proof. It isn't verification, even when it feels like it. And periodically, have someone outside your immediate circle, an accountant, a second advisor, anyone with no stake in the relationship, take an independent look at your accounts. The Millers, like the real clients this story is built from, weren't careless. They did what most people are taught to do: build a relationship with someone reliable, and lean on the people around them to confirm they'd made a good choice. What this case shows is that a whole community's trust can be wrong at the same time, in the same direction, for the same reason. That's not an argument for trusting no one. It's an argument for keeping at least one channel of verification that doesn't run through the same people you already believe.